Good evening and welcome back to 630 POV. Tonight in the Hot Box, Luther Stueland. He is the manager of healthcare reform analysis at Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Dakota. Luther, thanks for being in the Hot Box tonight. I wanted to bring you here tonight because there's still some undecided voters in this U.S. Senate race here in North Dakota. I think one of the biggest distinctions between Rick Berg and Heidi Heitkamp, Rick Berg wants full repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Heidi Heitkamp says, no, there's some good things here. Let's keep most of it. Obviously, get rid of what we don't like. So what I wanted tonight is have you give an objective point of view, what's good about the Affordable Care Act, maybe what's not so good. I know you've had a statewide tour recently talking to employers. So if you can not only talk about how it's impacting employers, but also obviously the employees at the dinner table, I think that's what I'd like you to share tonight. So let's start with what's good. As you were traveling across the state, what did you hear from employers and obviously their employees saying, hey, you know what, this is the good things about the Affordable Care Act?
Well, certainly, first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. We saw a desire on the part of our employer groups to learn a little bit more about how the healthcare law affected them. And so we developed a presentation and talked about key elements of the act and how that would impact employers and their decisions about what types of benefits they're going to offer to their employees. We know that employers are thinking about, should I drop coverage and let my employees go to the exchange? Should I change my coverage? What should I do? And so that was really what our effort was about. And what we found was that I think a lot of people had wanted to wait and see what happened before they gave a lot of thought to it. And so what they were asking, especially after the Supreme Court ruled that the mandate was constitutional, they were asking for, how does this affect us? And so that's what we did, and what we found, what we really find is that it affects individual employers differently, and then subsequently their employees differently. It affects everyone, but a lot of it hinges on some key questions about whether the group is large or small, based on the requirements in the Act, whether they're a fully insured or self-funded group, and whether or not their current plan is grandfathered or non-grandfathered.
So with that being said, though, let's talk about some of the positives. Obviously, there's some good things to this bill. So let's hear from you. As you're going across the state, what are employers and or their employees saying, hey, these are the things I really, really like about the Affordable Care Act?
Well, certainly the guaranteed issue provision that kind of went along with the mandate. Guaranteed issue meaning that if you apply for health insurance, you can't be denied in the small group and individual market starting in 2014. That kind of went along with the mandate, sort of the carrot and the stick there. So they like that idea. It doesn't allow health insurance carriers to decide whether or not to allow a new member on their plan, to decide whether or not that was a risk that the rest of the pool should be exposed to. They like that. I think they like the idea of exchanges to a certain degree. And I think some of the provisions, you know, again, it varies from employer to employer. If they like some of the new benefit requirements in health insurance, some employers like that, some employers don't. But one of the things that Blue Cross did was make a decision early on to allow plans to stay grandfathered if they want to, and if not, then they could go to non-grandfathered and accept all of the provisions of the Act.
Top two things you saw that employers were concerned about, saying, boy, this seems like Pandora's box to me. I don't know what's coming down the pipeline. This really concerns me. Were there any of those, and if so, what were the top two?
I think certainly the requirement that large employers offer health insurance to their employees or face possible penalties was a concern from employer groups. Nobody wants to pay penalties.
And what do you determine as a large employer?
The Act determines for that provision employers with more than 50 full-time equivalents. And so those types of large employers are required to offer health insurance or pay what Congress deemed a shared responsibility payment to pay for some of the subsidies that will be coming on the exchange, which would be another provision that I think employers are concerned about because they don't know how their decision about offering employees or dropping coverage would affect their employees because, again, it varies from household to household because there's income requirements and other requirements that are really individual specific.
Did you have any employers flat out, because, you know, Papa John's a while back said, hey, this is going to impact or increase the cost of pizzas, the Affordable Care Act. Did you have any employers say flat out, you know what, I'm just going to pay the penalty and let my employees deal with it?
I think what we found was that employers wanted to think about it. Once they understood that this impacted their employees differently from one situation to another situation, they stood back and said, you know what, we need to think about this and how this is going to affect us long term.
60 seconds, the biggest takeaway you got from the statewide tour and all the conversations you had with people about the Affordable Care Act.
Employers were really interested in how the provisions affected their business and how it affected their employees. So I think, you know, in the end, that was the request we were getting, was how does this affect me specifically? What do I have to do? What do I need to think about? Are there benefits to dropping coverage? Are there benefits to remaining grandfathered? And questions like that, so that they continued to ask questions that were specific to their business and how they can employ and retain good employees.
It sounds to me like there's still a lot of unanswered questions, yes?
We're expecting a lot more regulations to come out depending on what happens, but there's still plenty of unanswered questions, not only for us as a carrier to know how we should design our products, but also for employers as further regulation comes out.
Luther, thanks for being on the Hot Box. Appreciate it. Obviously, tomorrow, big day. Make sure you get out and vote. But these, I think, are one of the major, if not the most major distinction between Heidi Heitkamp and Rick Berg. Again, Rick Berg wants the full repeal. Heidi does not. Hopefully, this gave you some insight tonight as to what maybe push you over the edge if you still are an independent or undecided voter. Robert, back to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. Now, it's not too late for you to have your voice heard. You can tweet us. Use that hashtag 630POV or get in touch with us on our Facebook page. It's Valley News Live up next. It's one of the key battleground states, and who wins it could very well win the election. We'll have the latest from Ohio.